On a small, peaceful planet far from Earth, a young boy named Jake found himself on an adventure that would change his life forever. It was a day like any other. The sun was shining, the air smelled fresh, and the world around him seemed calm. But everything was about to change when he met someone from beyond the stars. Jake had always been curious about the universe, fascinated by the idea of other worlds. He'd often dreamt of space adventures, imagining himself as a brave explorer. But today, his dreams would collide with reality in the most unexpected way. It all began when Jake wandered into the forest near his home. He'd heard strange noises and thought he might find some new animals to study. But instead, he found something far more extraordinary. Standing in a clearing, staring at the sky, was a small alien girl. Her skin was a soft shade of lavender, and her hair shimmered like silver in the sunlight. Her large, curious eyes glowed with a light that seemed both ancient and wise. She wore a simple, flowing outfit that seemed to shimmer as if made of starlight itself. Jake was startled at first. He'd heard stories of aliens from his parents. But seeing one in person was something he had never imagined. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of wonder. He stepped closer, his heart racing. "Hello," Jake said cautiously, his voice shaking. "Are you ... lost?" The alien girl turned toward him. Her smile was warm, and she didn't seem afraid at all. Her voice, though soft, had a melodic quality that made it sound almost like music. "I am not lost, human boy," she replied in perfect English. "I'm exploring. I have traveled many worlds, but this one is new to me." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. An alien, standing before him, speaking his language. His mind raced with questions, but before he could ask anything, the girl spoke again. "You seem kind," she said, studying him with her large, shining eyes. "What is your name?" "I'm Jake," he said, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation, and ... "What's your name?" The alien girl's eyes twinkled as she thought for a moment. "I do not have a name like yours," she said softly. "But you may call me Lyra." Jake smiled, feeling a strange connection with this mysterious being. He sat down beside her, and the two began to talk. They shared stories of their worlds. Jake told Lyra about Earth, its animals, its cities, and the wonders of the planet. In return, Lyra spoke of her home, a distant world filled with advanced technology, floating cities, and beings who had lived for centuries as they talked. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the forest. It was then that Jake, still in awe of the alien girl, said something he would never forget. "Lyra," he said with a grin, "when you grow up, I'll marry you." Lyra tilted her head, clearly puzzled. "Marry me?" she asked softly, the sound of the words unfamiliar to her. "What is this? Marriage?" Jake laughed. It was just a joke, a silly thing to say. He didn't think it would mean anything. After all, she was just a little alien girl, and he was just a human boy. But there was something about the way Lyra looked at him, her eyes full of curiosity and wonder, that made him feel like he wanted to say it. Maybe, deep down, he never thought she'd take him seriously. "It's just something humans do," Jake explained, still smiling. "When two people care about each other, they promise to be together forever." Lyra studied him for a moment, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "I see," she said. "I will remember this promise, Jake. I do not know what marriage means, but I will remember your words." Jake didn't think much of it at the time. He thought it was just a funny thing to say, a moment of innocent humor between two new friends. He never expected Lyra to take him seriously. After all, she was just a child, and they both knew they lived in different worlds. What did a promise like that really mean? But as the sun finally set, painting the sky with brilliant shades of pink and orange, Jake realized something. He had made a promise to an alien. And though he didn't know it yet, That promise would be the thread that tied his fate to Lyra's. A fate neither of them could have imagined, as they said their goodbyes. Lyra touched Jake's shoulder lightly. "I will remember," she said again, her voice serious this time. "I will remember our promise. Jake, one day, I will return." Jake watched her walk away, her silver hair flowing behind her like a comet's tail. He waved, still laughing at the thought of his own words. He didn't think he would ever see Lyra again. After all, she was an alien, and he was just a boy from Earth. But what Jake didn't know was that this promise, made in the heat of the moment, would be something far more powerful than he could ever have imagined. And, in the years to come, he would learn that promises, especially those made in jest, sometimes have a way of becoming a reality. Years passed quickly, and life on Earth moved forward just as it always did. Jake grew into a young man, entering his late teens, with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The memory of Lyra, the strange alien girl who once smiled at him in the forest, slowly faded into the background of his life, like an old dream. He had become busy with school, friends, and his plans for the future. In his heart, there was still a curiosity about the stars, but the promise he had made seemed like nothing more than a childhood joke. A fleeting moment in time. Jake never truly expected to see Lyra again. After all, she was an alien. Her species was from a world beyond his reach. They had shared a brief encounter, a laugh, and a moment of connection. But life moved on. What were the chances of crossing paths with an alien again? He had forgotten about their conversation, the silly promise he made, and the laughter they shared. But for Lyra, things were different. In her world, time passed at a different rate, and she had grown up far faster than Jake could ever imagine. Her home was a distant planet where the people lived in advanced cities and explored the galaxy. And unlike humans, their species matured quickly. Their minds sharp and full of knowledge long before their physical forms caught up. Lyra, though still young in the human sense, was now far from the little girl Jake had met in the forest. She had become someone of great importance in her world, carrying the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. As Jake spent his days on Earth, unaware of the changes taking place in another galaxy, Lyra had trained herself to become a leader. Her people, once peaceful and isolated, now faced dangers from other factions that sought to control their planet's advanced technology. Lyra was becoming more powerful with each passing day, learning to wield abilities her kind had kept hidden for centuries. She could move objects with a thought, communicate over vast distances without speaking, and control energies that even the most advanced humans could not understand. But despite all of this power, there was one thing Lyra could not forget: the promise Jake had made to her years ago. She had remembered it every day. Though the idea of marriage was strange and foreign to her, she had come to understand its significance through the years. To her, it wasn't just a simple human custom. It had become something far deeper. It was a bond, a connection between two beings, no matter how different they were. The promise wasn't just a joke, it had become a part of her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant to be. As she grew older, Lyra found herself facing a difficult decision. Her people were facing a crisis, and her return to Earth was no longer just a matter of fulfilling a childhood promise. She was now a woman with responsibilities, but that promise still lingered in her mind like an unspoken truth. What did it mean, after all? What did Jake truly think of her now? For Lyra, the return to Earth wasn't just about a playful memory. It was about discovering the truth of the bond she shared with the young human boy she had once met. Was the promise more than just words? And if she returned, what would Jake's reaction be? Would he remember her? Or had the years made him forget the girl from the forest? Earth. Jake had his own life to navigate. Unaware of the storm that was about to hit, he had friends, family, and a future he was building. His thoughts rarely drifted to the past, to the moment he had promised to marry an alien girl, and yet, something in the universe had always seemed to pull at him, like an invisible thread connecting him to something greater. It was as though fate was waiting, ready to intertwine their worlds again. As the years passed, Lyra prepared herself for the journey. Her people's situation had grown dire, and she needed Jake's promise, his loyalty, and perhaps even his help. She knew the risks. The journey to Earth wasn't easy, and there were those who would stop at nothing to prevent her from reaching her destination. Nothing could stop her from fulfilling the promise that had become her truth. Meanwhile, Jake had grown into a man with dreams of his own. His life had settled into a predictable routine till one fateful morning when everything changed. As he walked to the park near his house, the sound of something familiar, yet out of place, echoed through the air, a hum, a distant noise that he couldn't place. It was as if the sky itself was calling to him. He had no idea that, at that very moment, Lyra was heading toward Earth, toward him, to bring their childhood promise to life. And as she traveled across the vast expanse of space, the only thing on her mind was Jock, the boy who had promised to marry her when she grew up. The boy she had never forgotten. As their worlds prepared to collide once more, the question remained, would Jake remember the girl from the forest? NW? The sky was clear that day, with only a few scattered clouds drifting lazily across the horizon. Jake stood at the edge of his small town's park, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket as he gazed up at the sky. He had always been a dreamer, his thoughts often drifting to the unknown reaches of space. Yet, even with his mind on far-off places, he could never have imagined that the answer to his long-lost promise was about to descend from the heavens. The hum in the air started softly at first, barely noticeable. Jake thought it might have been the wind, or maybe just the sound of his imagination, always hungry for excitement. But as the hum grew louder, it quickly turned into a deep, powerful rumble, something that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. His heart raced. Something was coming, something big. Jake's thoughts flashed back to his childhood wanderings when he had dreamt of aliens, spaceships, and the adventures of distant worlds. Never did he think those dreams would become reality. Suddenly, a flash of light split the sky, and before Jake could react, a spacecraft emerged from the clouds. It was sleek, silver, and impossibly beautiful, shaped like something out of his wildest sci-fi fantasies. His breath caught in his throat as the ship began to descend, silently at first. Then, with a subtle hum that felt like it was vibrating deep inside his bones, Jake took a few hesitant steps forward, his feet unsure of their own motion. As the ship neared the ground, the bright light around it dimmed, and there, standing in the doorway of the ship, was a figure he knew all too well. It was Lyra, but she was no longer the little alien girl he had once known. No longer the curious, innocent child he had jokingly promised to marry. She had grown, and in the process, transformed into someone completely different. Her skin shimmered with the glow of 1,000 stars. Her hair flowed like liquid silver. And her eyes, those captivating, glowing eyes, held an ancient wisdom, a depth that Jake could never have imagined. The girl he once thought of as a distant memory now stood before him, radiant and powerful. Jake froze. His mind raced with confusion, disbelief, and a sudden flood of forgotten emotions. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Jake," Lyra said, her voice soft but strong, resonating in the quiet of the park. "It's been a long time." Her voice was no longer the innocent, curious tone he remembered. It was filled with purpose and maturity, the voice of someone who had seen worlds and faced battles. She stepped down from the ship, her presence commanding and otherworldly, as if the very air around her bent to her will. For a moment, all Jake could do was stare, speechless. The last time he saw her, she was a child, and he had never imagined that this moment would come. The memory of his promise, silly, joking remark made years ago flashed back in his mind. He had forgotten about it, thought nothing of it. But clearly, Lyra hadn't. "You remember me?" she asked, her expression serious, but with a hint of hope in her eyes. "Of course, I remember you," Jake stammered, still in shock. "But how? You ... You grew up so fast." Lyra nodded, her eyes softening. "In my world, time moves differently. I've spent years preparing for this moment, preparing to return, and to claim what was promised." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Promise. The silly words he had spoken all those years ago now seemed like a weighty chain, pulling him back to a time and place he had long since moved past. "You ... You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really came back because of that? A joke I made?" Lyra looked at him intently, her gaze unwavering. "It was never a joke to me, Jake. Your words were a promise, and I've kept it in my heart all these years." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around them. But there was an eerie stillness in the air between them, like the world was holding its breath. Jake felt as if the universe had aligned in that single moment. Here she was, Lyra, the girl he had promised to marry as a child, and she was no longer just an alien girl from a distant planet. She was something far greater. Someone with a purpose far beyond what he could understand. His mind spun as he tried to grasp what was happening. He hadn't seen her in years, hadn't thought about their brief encounter in ages. And now, here she was, standing in front of him, waiting for him to fulfill a promise he hadn't even remembered making. But the weight of her presence, her quiet power, and the intensity in her eyes made it clear that this was no fantasy. "I've come for you, Jake," she said, her voice steady. "I've come to remind you of the promise you made, and to ask if you will honor it. Will you marry me, as you promised all those years ago?" Jake's mind reeled. He had been expecting many things, but not this. He wasn't ready for this. But the moment Lyra stood before him, looking up at him with those glowing eyes, he realized that it wasn't about being ready. It was about something far deeper. Something that reached beyond time, beyond the stars themselves. And suddenly, he understood. This was not just a return. It was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The promise, it seemed, was no longer just a joke. It was fate. The shock of Lyra's return still hung in the air as Jake struggled to make sense of what had just transpired. His mind raced, but his heart could only focus on one thing: the girl who had stood before him all those years ago, now transformed into something entirely different. She was no longer the child he had promised to marry on a whimsical whim. She had returned with a purpose, a destiny far greater than either of them had ever anticipated. As Lyra stood before him, her glowing eyes searching his for a response, Jake felt something deep within him stir an undeniable pull, like a magnetic force that had always been there but had only now been awakened. His rational mind screamed at him to run, to question everything, to dismiss the wild idea that his childhood words could actually come to life. But his heart was already long gone, connected to her, to this moment. "I never thought I'd see you again," Jake said, his voice quieter now, as if speaking the words aloud might make them more real. Lyra's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Jake saw a flicker of the same innocent child he had once known. But only for a second. She had changed, and with that change came the weight of leadership, power, and a responsibility far greater than Jake could comprehend. "I never forgot," she replied softly. "I've waited for this day for a long time, but I didn't just come to collect on a promise, Jake. I came because my world needs you. My people need you." The words hit him like a sudden gust of wind, leaving him breathless and unsure. Jake looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity in them, but also something darker, a sense of urgency, of burden. He had thought that their meeting was meant to be about an old promise, a long-lost joke. But it was clear now that it was about so much more. Need me? Jake repeated, still struggling to process. I'm just guy from Earth. I don't have anything to offer. You have more than you think, Lyra said, stepping closer, her presence commanding yet strangely comforting. You don't know it yet, but you're part of something greater than both of us. The promise was just the beginning. Her words left Jake reeling. He had never imagined that his simple childhood promise to marry an alien girl would somehow be tied to the fate of two worlds. But standing here, with Lyra so close, the weight of her words was impossible to ignore. What do you mean? Asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra paused for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Then she spoke again, her tone more serious, her voice tinged with a quiet sadness. My people. We're in danger. There are forces out there that want to take control of our planet, of our technology. I am not just an alien girl. Jake, I am the heir to a kingdom that holds secrets that could change everything for both our worlds. The promise you made all those years ago. It was more than a joke. It was a bond. A bond that, if fulfilled, will unite our fates and perhaps give us the strength to fight against the darkness that threatens us. Jake's mind spun. It was as if the ground beneath his feet had shifted, opening up a vast new world he had never even considered. The girl he had once joked about marrying was now standing before him, not just as an alien, but as a leader, carrying the hopes and future of an entire civilization. Lyra. Jake whispered, his voice cracking slightly. I don't understand. I'm just a human. I don't know anything about your world, about the dangers you're facing. How could I possibly help? Lyra stepped even closer, her eyes locked on his with a fierce intensity. Because, Jake, what you don't realize is that your heart, your courage, your willingness to make a promise, those things are more powerful than you know. You may not have the strength or knowledge of my people, but you have something that no one else does. You have the ability to connect, to see beyond the walls we build around ourselves. And that, she said, her voice unwavering, is the key to saving us all. The air between them crackled with energy, and Jake felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what was happening to him. He didn't know if he was ready for any of this. But one thing was clear. The girl he had promised to marry all those years ago was no longer just a memory. She was real, and the bond between them was something neither of them could deny. But Jake began, unsure of how to voice the thoughts swirling in his mind. If I help you, if I'm really part of this, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for our future? Lyra's gaze softened, and for the days that followed Lyra's arrival were nothing like Jake had ever imagined. He had spent his life dreaming of adventure and the mysteries of the universe. But this was no dream. Lyra's presence was like a storm in his life, shifting everything he thought he knew about the world and about himself. The alien girl he had once promised to marry was now a woman with secrets, a leader burdened with the fate of an entire planet. But despite the depth of her responsibility, Jake felt a pull toward her that he couldn't explain as they spent more time together. Lyra revealed the complexities of her world and the deep political struggles she had been born into. She told him stories of her people, how they had once lived in harmony, but that peace had been shattered by war and greed. Powerful factions from other galaxies now sought to control their planet's resources. Then Lyra's family, the royal bloodline, had been the target of ruthless attempts to usurp their reign. But even more troubling was the truth about Lyra's heritage, a truth that had been kept hidden for centuries. One evening, as the two of them sat together in the quiet of Jake's apartment, Lyra finally shared the piece of her past she had kept locked away for so long. The glow in her eyes dimmed as she spoke, the weight of the words heavy on her heart. "I'm not just the heir to a royal line, Jake," she began, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I'm the last of my kind, the last of the original rulers of my world. And there's something even darker. A power within me that I've only begun to understand." Jake's heart thudded in his chest. He had always known there was something extraordinary about her, but he hadn't imagined it could be this profound. "What kind of power?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra took a deep breath, her gaze drifting toward the window as if searching for the right words. "It's something that has been passed down through generations of my people. A connection to an ancient energy that can shape the course of entire civilizations. But it's also something that can be dangerous if it's used wrong. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. That's why my family hid it, kept it locked away for so long, and now, as the last of my line, it's my responsibility to control it." Jake felt the ground beneath him shift once more. He had always thought of Lyra as the sweet, curious alien girl he had met in the forest. But now, he realized she was more and so much more. Her power wasn't just a physical strength. It was something ancient, something that had the potential to either save or ruin worlds. "And you think," Jake paused, his throat tight, "you think your people's enemies are after this power?" Lyra nodded solemnly. "Yes, they know that if they control it, they control everything. My bloodline is the key to unlocking this power, but I won't let them have it. I've spent years training, learning to harness it so it doesn't destroy me or anyone else. But the truth is, I can't do it alone." Jake felt a rush of emotions, fear, confusion, and a deep sense of protectiveness he couldn't quite explain. The girl he had promised to marry was now standing before him, carrying the weight of an entire planet's future. He had no idea what to do or how to help her. He was just a human. What could he possibly offer in the face of something so immense? "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said finally, his voice steady with determination. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she looked almost surprised. "Jake, you don't know what you're offering. This is bigger than anything you've ever imagined." "I know," he replied, "but I'm not going to leave you to face it alone. You didn't come here just for a promise. You came because you need help. And I'm not just going to sit back and watch you fight this battle on your own." For the first time since her arrival, Lyra smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was enough to make Jake feel like he had made the right choice. He could see the relief in her eyes, the gratitude that she hadn't been expecting. "You're not just a human, Jake," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with a new warmth. "You're the one who reminded me what hope is. You're the one who saw me even when I was just a child. And now, together, we have a chance to save everything." Jake didn't know how, but something deep inside him told him this was the moment everything had been leading to. The bond that had formed between him and Lyra had always been more than a simple promise. It was a thread connecting their fates, drawing them together across galaxies, across time. As the days passed, Lyra shared more about the power within her, its origins, its potential, and the dangers that came with it. She trained, learning to control it, and Jake was there by her side, supporting her, standing as her anchor. With each passing day, their connection deepened. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They had become something greater, something stronger than the sum of their parts. But the enemy was still out there, waiting, watching. And as they prepared to face whatever dangers lay ahead, Jake realized that this was only the beginning. The battle for Lyra's future and for the fate of both their worlds was far from over. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake stood beside Lyra, looking out over the vast cityscape. The skyline shimmered with neon lights and towering buildings, a constant reminder of the technological wonders of our home planet. But there was no beauty in the scene tonight. Only the looming threat of something far darker, a threat that could shatter the peace they had fought so hard to protect. Lyra had been training for weeks, learning to harness the ancient power within her. But even with her abilities growing stronger every day, Jake knew she couldn't face this challenge alone. The enemies she had spoken of, ruthless factions from distant galaxies, were closing in. And they weren't just after her power. They were after everything she stood for, everything her people had built. The enemy ships had been spotted on the outskirts of the planet's atmosphere, their dark silhouettes hanging like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was only a matter of time before they would come, and when they did, they would bring an army with them, an army strong enough to tear apart everything Lyra had fought to protect. Jake turned to Lyra, his heart heavy with the weight of their situation. She had always been strong, but tonight she seemed distant, as if the enormity of what they were facing had finally taken its toll on her. "Lyra," Jake said softly, his voice full of concern, "you don't have to do this alone. We've been through so much together, and you've taught me more than I could have ever imagined. But I don't want to lose you. You've become everything to me." Lyra met his gaze, and for a moment, Jake saw the same vulnerability he had once seen in her as a child, the same innocence. But it quickly faded, replaced by the fierce determination that had made her the leader she was today. "I've been carrying this burden for so long." "Jake," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. "But now, you're right. It's not just about my world. It's about all of us, about you, about me. We're in this together, and I will do everything I can to protect us." Jake could feel the weight of her words, but he also felt something else, a sense of hope. The bond between them had grown deeper than he could ever have imagined. They weren't just allies in this fight. They were partners. Together, they could face anything. "We'll fight together," Jake said, his voice firm with conviction. "We'll protect your people. We'll protect this world. And we'll protect each other. We have to believe that we can make a difference, that we can win." Lyra nodded, her gaze hardening with resolve. "We will win," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "But there's something I need you to understand, Jake. The power within me's not just a tool. It's a bond. A connection between me and the energy of the universe itself. It's the only way we can fight back against them, but it comes with a price. If I lose control," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake could see it in her eyes. If she lost control, everything she had fought for, everything they had worked for, it could be destroyed in an instant. "I won't let you lose control," Jake said quickly, reaching for her hand. "We'll figure this out together. I'm here, always." Lyra's eyes softened for a moment as she squeezed his hand. "I know you are, Jake, and I don't take that for granted." The weight of the situation hung heavily over them, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt a flicker of confidence. Lyra wasn't just the powerful alien princess she had been born to be. She was someone who had come to trust him too, rely on him, and in turn, he had come to trust and rely on her. They were a team, and together, they were unstoppable. But just as they were about to turn and face the challenges ahead, a chilling sound echoed through the night, a deep, ominous hum. Jake turned quickly, his heart racing. The sound grew louder, and within seconds, the ground beneath them trembled. The enemy had arrived. A massive fleet of dark ships descended from the sky, their sleek forms silhouetted against the stars. It was as if the very darkness of space itself had come to claim them. Jake's pulse quickened. The battle had begun. Lyra stepped forward, her expression unwavering. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life, but the fear in Jake's eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about fighting. This was about survival. "I won't let them take you," Jake said, his voice low but determined. Lyra turned to him, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "And I won't let them take." The battlefield was unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. The stars above were blotted out by the dark ships, their metallic bodies reflecting the faint light of distant suns as they closed in. Lyra stood beside him, her hand gripping his tightly, her power radiating like a force field around them. There was no turning back now. The fate of her people and the future of both their worlds rested on what happened next. As the enemy fleet descended from the heavens, their ships flickered with menacing red lights, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The air was thick with the scent of ionized metal and the hum of energy weapons charging. Jake could hear the distant roar of weapons firing and the cries of soldiers echoing across the vast plains below them. Every instinct in his body screamed to run, to hide, to protect himself, but there was no time for fear. There was no time for hesitation. Lyra, standing tall and resolute, turned to Jake, her expression as fierce and determined as it had ever been. She had already prepared herself for the worst, but now, as the enemy's ships loomed closer, she felt the weight of their situation pressing harder against her. She could feel the power inside her, swirling just beneath her skin, ready to erupt. But with that power came a cost to danger she couldn't ignore. "Jake, a coup," she said softly, her voice steady, though there was a rawness to it, a vulnerability that only he could hear. "The power within me, if I unleash it fully, there's no turning back. It could tear us apart, both of us. I don't know what will happen when I do this, but if we're going to survive, I need you to trust me." Jake looked at her, his heart aching with the weight of her words. He had never been this close to something so dangerous, so unpredictable. But in that moment, standing beside her, he knew one thing for sure. He trusted her, more than he had ever trusted anyone. "I trust you, Lyra," he said, his voice unwavering, despite the storm raging around them. "We've been through everything. Together, whatever happens, we'll face it together. You don't have to do this alone." Her eyes softened at his words, the raw emotion in them more powerful than anything they had faced so far. In that brief, silent moment, everything between them came into focus. The promise, the bond, the fight had all led to this. Without another word, Lyra stepped forward, raising her hand toward the sky. The energy inside her pulsed, a blinding light beginning to radiate from her body, as if the stars themselves were answering her call. Her power surged outward, the air crackling with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Jake could feel the pull of it, the weight of something vast and ancient coursing through him as well. They were no longer just two individuals. Standing on a battlefield, they were connected, united by the same force that had bound them together since the day they met. The enemy fleet faltered for a moment, the ships hesitating as if sensing the immense power Lyra was channeling. She was no longer just an alien princess. She was a force of nature, a being of unimaginable power for a brief moment. Jake felt the raw beauty of that power, incredible strength that lay within her. But that power came with a terrible price. Lyra's face twisted in pain as the energy threatened to overwhelm her, the strain of controlling such a force too much to bear. Her knees buckled, and for a split second, Jake thought he might lose her. His heart stopped as he reached for her, but she looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "Jake, you have to hold on," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the roaring energy. "If I let go, if I give in completely, I don't know what will happen to us. We might not survive. I can't do this alone. You have to help me, Jake. You have to keep me grounded." For the first time, Jake understood the true extent of the burden she carried. This wasn't just a battle for her people, was a battle for her very soul. The power within her could save them, but it could also consume her if she lost control. With no time to think, Jake did what his heart told him to do. He reached for her, his fingers locking with hers. And as their hands touched, he felt the surge of energy pass between them, lightning bolt of raw, untamed force. But this time, it wasn't just Lyra's power. It was theirs, together, suddenly. The world seemed to shift. Jake's mind flashed with flashes of alien landscapes, galaxies colliding, and stars being born. He saw Lyra's past, her struggles, her pain, her determination to protect her people. He felt the weight of the universe pressing against them, but also the love and connection that had grown between them. The bond that had tied their fates together. And then, in an instant, everything went quiet. The energy that had been building up around them collapsed inward like a shockwave, blasting outward with the force of 1,000 storms. The enemy fleet was thrown back, their ships scattering like leaves in the wind. The ground beneath them cracked. The sky above them split open as a wave of pure light surged through the battlefield. But just as quickly as it came, the light began to fade. The power that had once felt limitless now ebbed, leaving behind only the remnants of its incredible force. Lyra collapsed into Jake's arms, her body trembling, her breath shallow. "Lyra," Jake cried, panic rising in his chest. She opened her eyes slowly, her lips curling into a weak smile. "We did it, Jake," she whispered, her voice faint but filled with quiet triumph. "We saved them." But even as the last of the enemy ships retreated and the dust settled on the battlefield, Jake felt a nagging fear claw at him. The power they had unleashed had come at a cost, and he wasn't sure if they were truly safe. There was still so much unknown about what had just transpired. What would be the aftermath of this battle? And, more importantly, what would happen to them now after everything they had done? As the stars began to shine through the remnants of the battle, Jake held Lyra close, knowing one thing for certain. The future was uncertain. But whatever came next, they would face it together. The battle had ended. But the true test of their bond was only just beginning.